So to kick us off, I am Jess Roberts. I am the Director of Habitat Connectivity here at Wild Virginia, and I had a large part in creating what we call Virginia's Habitat Connectivity Hub, which was formed through the Virginia Safe Wildlife Corridors Collaborative. And it's just a bunch of partners doing really wonderful work all across Virginia, increasing habitat connectivity and reducing that wildlife vehicle conflict. So if you haven't already seen the hub, I'm going to put the link in the chat so you can see it. I think I sent it to just the hosts and the panelists. So 1 second, let me put it for everybody. There we go. So if you haven't seen the hub yet, please do see our hub. And so the point of our hub highlights series, so this will be a series, this is just episode 1, is going to be highlighting the specific projects you can find on the Habitat Connectivity Hub, how to use any tools that are on there, and just to really go more in depth about the history and how to use the hub for your information purposes. So for our first hub highlights, we are going to hear from the Loudoun County folks. So we have Alexa Busby first, who is an undergraduate from William & Mary, and she partnered with the Virginia Department of Wildlife Resources to really look into prioritizing certain areas for wildlife crossing. So we're going to hear about her project. And then we're going to hear from Crissy Bellandi, and she coordinates the Virginia Master Naturalist and Loudoun Wildlife Conservancy volunteers for a Loudoun County Citizen Science Road Wildlife Monitoring Project. So super cool. Both of these projects you can find on the hub. So after they're going to give you an in-depth description of both of their projects, I am going to give you a little bit of description of where you can find this information on the hub and how to get more information about it. And then also, so for a Q&A, they are going to give their presentations first, but if you look down and you see the Q&A section, you can put your question in there at any time during the webinar. So please, if you have a question at any time during the webinar, please put it in the Q&A section. At the end, last like 15 minutes or so, we are going to do a moderated Q&A for our guest speakers. So again, thank you so much for everyone who's coming to learn about mitigating wildlife vehicle conflict in Loudoun County, Virginia. So, and please do note it's being recorded. And then also if you have any questions, again, put it in that Q&A section at any time. And at the end, we will answer those questions. All right, so without further ado, first up who is chatting with us is Alexa Busby. Take it away, Alexa.
Hi everyone, I'm Alexa. Like Jessica said, I'm an undergraduate student at William & Mary, and I'm studying biology and environmental science. And over the past year, I had the opportunity to work on a collaborative project with the Department of Wildlife Resources, as well as William & Mary's Institute for Integrative Conservation and Applied Conservation and Ecological Research Lab, in order to improve road safety for both wildlife and drivers in the rapidly urbanizing landscape of Northern Virginia. There we go. Okay, so if you don't know much about wildlife vehicle collisions, they have a really negative impact for both humans and wildlife. In terms of human impact, they decrease safety by causing injury or even death, and they cause property damage to vehicles and road infrastructure. In terms of negative impact on wildlife vehicle collision themselves and the roads that act as a barrier between habitat fragments alter predator-prey interactions and reduce population viability through reducing habitat availability, limiting dispersal between these habitat patches, creating genetic isolation between populations, and then causing direct mortality when a wildlife is struck with a vehicle. So there's 3 major strategies that exist in order to mitigate these negative impacts of wildlife vehicle collisions. One major strategy is the construction of over or underpasses And these are structures that are built either over top or beneath the road and are specifically designed to facilitate the passage of wildlife. However, these can be really expensive, and they might not be feasible in all areas. Another major strategy is the addition of wildlife fencing at existing underpasses. So already there are areas of road where there's bridges or culverts that allow streams to pass beneath the roadway. And a lot of these actually have dry paths that when fencing is installed parallel to the road, it can funnel wildlife under these roads through these underpasses and prevent wildlife vehicle collisions that way, but still maintain the connectivity between the habitats. And the third strategy is the addition of changeable message signs. So these are signs that are put next to the road during peak times of wildlife movement to alert drivers of the increased risk. So my project focused in Loudoun County, Virginia. And Virginia as a state is ranked number 9th in the country for its rate of annual wildlife vehicle collisions. And then Loudoun County specifically has the highest annual rate of wildlife vehicle collisions in all of Virginia. And it also has a very fragmented landscape. If you can see in this map, red indicates these highly urbanized areas, yellow indicates farmland, and then green indicates the forests. So we can see that the forests in Loudoun are very fragmented and that urbanization is a big part of the county. So action to mitigate wildlife vehicle collisions and connect these habitats is much needed there. So my research had 3 main objectives to address some knowledge gaps regarding wildlife crossings in Loudoun. The first one being government officials needed to know where wildlife crossings would be most effective if they were installed. So my objective was to identify priority areas where wildlife crossings should be established. There was also a knowledge gap on then how to implement effective wildlife crossings in these priority areas. So for each priority area, I created an action plan that kind of gave a general idea of wildlife crossing design, how that would look at each location. And then finally, the data we use to map and understand the frequency of wildlife vehicle collisions comes from police reports. And this highly underestimates the true frequency of wildlife vehicle collisions. It's found to underestimate the true frequency by a factor of between 5 and 9. So, and these police reports also don't report on smaller animals, like it's really only if a deer or a bear is involved. So we needed to gather some more accurate data on these wildlife vehicle collisions. So my objective was to develop a methodology for citizen science data collection of this wildlife activity around roads in Loudoun. So to first identify these 10 priority areas, I used GIS analysis, which stands for Geospatial Information Systems. And that's just like, it's a computer mapping tool that allows you to take location and place-based data and analyze it to develop conservation solutions. So I first used these police reports to determine wildlife vehicle collision hotspots in Loudoun. And then from there, I further narrowed the areas down to hotspots that were near habitat corridors, and further narrowed that down to areas that were near existing road underpasses. And that gave me this priority areas map of 10 locations in Loudoun where wildlife crossings would be most effective if they were installed. And like I said, these were based on areas that were hotspots, so they had a really high density of deer and or bear vehicle collisions. And they were also near high quality habitat, so they promoted connectivity, and there was a high feasibility of wildlife fencing being able to be installed at that site because of an existing underpass there. To create my report and which had the wildlife crossing designs. I used VDOT's Wildlife Crossing Best Management Practices guidance document, which details a lot of the specifics of what the fencing should look like and what the underpasses should look like to facilitate wildlife passage. And then I conducted in-field site evaluations of each of those areas I selected to see how suitable they were for fencing being installed and for wildlife to cross there. And that resulted in my priority areas report. This is an example of what it would look like for one area. And it included things like road characteristics, like speed limit, traffic flow, and then it also included how suitable the area was for the installation of fencing, how suitable the underpass was for passage by these larger animals, and then how highly ranked the surrounding habitat was. It also had maps of each area and gave it a context of the surrounding landscape, the rates of deer and bear vehicle collisions, some land characteristics, and then this is an example of a action plan, kind of a diagram of what the fencing would look like if installed. And finally, for the citizen science portion, I created an app in ArcGIS's Survey 123 that allows citizen scientists to take data from their phone, from the comfort of their car, and then conducted some volunteer outreach with volunteers from Virginia Department of Wildlife Resources, the Loudoun Wildlife Conservancy, and then the Virginia Master Naturalist chapter in Loudoun. And the result of that was the collection of more accurate data. So I have here some screenshots from the citizen science app I developed. So the app automatically takes the location of the wildlife, where the wildlife was observed, and then asks the user a few more questions about that. And this graph shows the data to date, and it's broken down by species of wildlife. So right now, the raccoon is the most commonly observed species, followed by deer. And finally, I created the Citizen Science Dashboard. So this is a website that is updated every 5 minutes with the data that the citizen scientists are collecting. And it's another ArcGIS product. And Crissy will talk a little bit more about the dashboard and how that data is collected. And I have a little QR code if you're interested in checking that out. So in conclusion, this is an example of an applied conservation project in that the research I did provided Loudoun County government with guidance on how to implement wildlife crossings. It also created a local model of how to take action towards implementing wildlife crossings. And hopefully this will inspire other counties in Virginia to do the same thing as Loudoun and lead to broader statewide improvements in driver and wildlife safety, increased connectivity of habitats, and decreased economic costs associated with wildlife vehicle collisions. And I would like to thank everyone who has helped me with this project. Jordan Green from DWR, who works in Loudoun, my professors, Dr. Matthias Loy and Robert Rose, and Erica Garut at the IIC for all their help with this project. And thank you for listening.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Alexa. So again, if you have any questions, at any point, you can put them in the Q&A tab down below, and we will answer them at the end of both presentations. So right now, we are going to move into Crissy's presentation. So Crissy, go for it.
Thank you so much, Jess. Let me go ahead and share my screen. All right, so I am Crissy Bellandi, and I'm the volunteer coordinator for the Loudoun Road Monitoring Survey. And this is an important project, and it picks up from all of the great work that Alexa has been doing. to create the app and the dashboard, as she just talked about. And so this project is between the Master Naturalist Banshee Reeks chapter and Loudoun Wildlife Conservancy. And these are both nonprofit organizations in Loudoun County. And their VMN is also part of the wider state volunteer Master Naturalist program that's run out of Virginia Tech. And importantly, DWR continues to be an important partner in this, and they are sponsoring this project, and we work with them on an ongoing basis on project status updates. And most importantly, none of this work would be possible without an army of incredible volunteers from VMN and Loudoun Wildlife. And it's the volunteers who are making the citizen science happen and this project possible. So I'm going to talk about citizen science a little bit just for context. Many of you have probably heard the term before, but may not know exactly what it means. And so before jumping into the project details, I'll talk about this just a little bit. So citizen science is when volunteers, often highly trained volunteers, so people who are not working in a professional capacity, perform tasks that professionals would, such as making observations, analyzing information, and collecting data. And the information collected by these volunteers can then be used by professional scientists, by researchers. It could be used by students or decision makers, such as county representatives or state agency decision makers. But the information could also be used by other volunteers as well on other projects. And projects can be done in person, such as projects like this one. And there are also a number of virtual citizen science initiatives out there on platforms such as Zooniverse. You may also be familiar with iNaturalist. That's also a citizen science platform. And citizen science is really important for two key reasons. The first is that it fills a gap for researchers and agencies that don't have capacity and often funding to collect the information that is needed. And particularly when it comes to conservation, there are major data gaps and there's never enough funding for all of the resources that are needed. And so citizen science helps to bridge that gap. And it helps collect information for species that wouldn't necessarily be possible without those volunteers making the work happen. And secondly, citizen science is really important because it creates opportunities for volunteers to connect and contribute to conservation while networking with like-minded people. And they also get to learn cool new skills, such as data collection methods and how to partner with a number of organizations, whether nonprofits or state agencies. And so this particular citizen science project came about as a result of both state law and a federal bill that's making all of this possible. And so in 2020, Virginia created the Virginia Wildlife Corridor Action Plan, making Virginia one of the first Eastern US states to develop such a plan. And wildlife corridors plans are more common out west. So Virginia is really doing a great job leading the way on the East Coast. And then in 2021, the bipartisan infrastructure law passed, which created an incentive in the form of grants for states and localities to develop roadway infrastructure solutions that help facilitate wildlife movement. And there was a smaller Wildlife Corridor Conservation Act that made it into that larger infrastructure law, which was very fortunate. And so all of these pieces coming together with the timing of the state plan along with the federal funding really help make not just this project possible, but results possible based on the outcome. And so particularly because Loudoun is the #1 location in the state for deer collisions, which is dangerous for deer and for drivers, it also results in higher car insurance rates for everyone. So there's a widespread impact from these collisions. So in order to abate the risk of wildlife vehicle interactions and make travel safer for wildlife and for people, it's important that we can collect this data through citizen science, and so that decision makers can have the information they need to understand where collisions are happening and where there are smart solutions that can be implemented, such as the one that Alexa described. So this project in particular started in the fall of 2023 after DWR connected with the VMN Banshee Reeks chapter about this wildlife road survey opportunity. And we then connected with Alexa, who did all of the amazing work to develop the project, create the app that collects the survey data, and develop the training program for volunteers. So an immense thank you to Alexa for all of this amazing work. And from there, VMN, DWR, and Alexa developed the logistics to organize the survey routes and enlist and train volunteers from 2 different nonprofit organizations. So currently, the data collection portion of the project is taking place, and it will run through the end of this year, at which point there should be sufficient data to indicate where collisions are happening, which species they affect the most, as Alexa just showed. Unfortunately, raccoons are a primary victim of wildlife mortality, vehicle mortality. And so from that, ideally in the data set, we can also see some seasonal indicators about which species are most at risk at different times of the year. And the aim of this project is to collect data on wildlife that has been struck by a vehicle, as well as live animals that are within 20 feet of the roadway. And this allows us to track which species are being struck by cars most often, along with species that have common road adjacent use patterns. And so in order to collect the data, teams of 2 volunteers conduct road surveys each week along 2 designated routes in Loudoun County. One route covers the full length of Route 7, which runs east to west in the county, and the second route is Route 15, which runs north to south. And volunteers use designated start, end, and turnaround points on the routes each week. And this ensures that the data is being collected in a consistent way and that the collection approach we are using has a repeatable methodology. And this helps decision makers know that they can reliably use the data because it was collected in a deliberate way. And all volunteers are trained prior to their first volunteer shift. And this step is really important. And so this is because volunteers are introduced to the data collection app, the Survey 123, which uses ArcGIS. And we discuss really important safety protocols, which become important on anything around any kind of project around a roadway. And we also go over route directions. And this ensures that volunteers are prepared as soon as they arrive at the survey starting point. Importantly, volunteers are required to work in pairs as one drives and the other collects data on their cell phone to record any wildlife observations while the other is driving. And working in pairs is required because using a handheld device while driving is not permitted in Virginia, and it's not safe. And so we want to ensure that all the data that we collect is useful, but that volunteers are safe while performing any of the survey collection routes. And the app is really the key to the success of this project because it records the location of the wildlife observation, and which could, like as I mentioned, it could be an animal that was struck by a vehicle, or it could be a live animal that's near the roadway. And the user records that information. They input the type of animal observed, and they may need to select unknown if it's not discernible. The user also records the number of animals and a confidence level about the type of animal, because at highway speed, it's not always possible to tell what an animal is, and all of that data is then recorded in the app. So for each observation, we know the GPS location, where roadway wildlife was spotted, what the animal likely was, and how confident the volunteer is in that classification, how many animals were at the location, and whether they were living or not. And one of the great tools that we've been leveraging in this project is Sign Up Genius. This has been a fantastic tool because it supports the multiple routes per week for volunteers. And we can see on the project team if a route is open and let volunteers know if coverage is needed to ensure that all routes are covered every single week. And so far, I think there's only been one route that was not covered on a given weekend. And for a project that requires 2 teams surveying 2 different routes every single weekend, I feel like that's a pretty good track record so far. And the project team also hosts important reminders about the project on the sign up page. And so, for example, we host reminders about the app setup, as well as safety reminders, so no one attempts to drive and record data at the same time. And the important thing about this as well is that we can retrieve data from the sign up to identify who conducted the survey route on a given week. So if there's any questions about the data, we can go back to that volunteer, ask for clarification, get more clarity. And that way it's always, we always know the right person to ask for any data related questions. And then volunteers also receive a biweekly email listing any available survey dates, any project updates, and any success markers, along with important reminders and links to project documentation. And the email currently goes out bi-weekly just to keep everyone involved without, sending too many emails and giving everybody inbox fatigue. So here's a snapshot of the routes. And this is Route 7, which runs from Bluemont to Sterling. And volunteers start at the Harmony Park and Ride in Hamilton. And for each route, volunteers cover the full round trip path of the road using designated start, turnaround, and endpoints, as I mentioned. And so that same route is fully covered and all observations are gathered each week. And volunteers go on a Friday through Sunday time period each week to ensure that we aren't duplicating observations between volunteer teams. And this is Route 15, which passes from just beyond the state border at Pointer Rocks, Maryland, and extends through Haymarket on the southern side of the route. And these routes were chosen due to high traffic volume and the relation to wildlife corridors in the county. And we know that there are high rates of development in Loudoun, and there have been for over 20 years. And so this means more cars on major roads and more opportunities for wildlife collisions. And this necessitates intervention to mitigate those collisions, to protect wildlife and drivers, and create smart solutions that work for everyone and that are readily implemented and practical. And so depending on the success of this project, other roads in the county could be assessed for wildlife vehicle collision avoidance. And Alexa shared a view of the dashboard. And this project's success is in the data we collect, because that's going to inform how decision makers choose to implement solutions. And so this is a snapshot of the dashboard with the real-time results that volunteers are collecting. And you can see that as of March 30th, there were 538 observations that had been collected. And this is a lot of observations, which is great from a data perspective. Though most of the data points represent a wildlife that was lost on our roads. And I think that that's an important thing to keep in mind, that each of these data points represent a solution that was needed. And there are concentrations of observations between Round Hill and Bluemont in western Loudoun, and Ashburn and Leesburg in eastern Loudoun on Route 7. And then on Route 15, we see that there are concentrations of wildlife road interactions around Oatlands, and then from Luckett's north to the Maryland border. And there is still a lot of data collection still to be done. And this is exactly what this project is trying to assess. Where are the greatest number of wildlife vehicle interactions and the greatest need for solutions that mitigate those interactions? And so ultimately, the goal of the project is to identify where the highest incidence of wildlife vehicle interactions are occurring, what species are being impacted, and that way appropriate mitigation strategies can be implemented. And these could take the form of fencing and bridges for large mammals, or even culverts for smaller to medium-sized wildlife. Ideally, there will be options that account for not just mammals, which are easy to observe along roadways, but also reptiles and amphibians, which also traverse the roadways and are a lot less visible to drivers. So where do we go from here? The project will run through the end of the year, with data collection occurring each week along the 2 designated routes. And we are always accepting new volunteers. So if you are interested, you may contact the email address on the screen, wildlifecrossingsva@gmail.com, and I will get you set up with training, help you sign up to conduct survey routes, and include you on the biweekly project updates. So please do let me know if you're interested in volunteering for this project. And then once the data is collected at the end of this year, the State Department of Wildlife Resources is going to access the data and review it to assess the findings. From there, it becomes a matter of multi-agency coordination. DWR, VDOT, and the Loudoun County Board and others will ultimately make the decision to determine where wildlife vehicle mitigations and crossings are needed in the county. And again, this could take a number of forms, such as installing fencing, installing culverts or bridges, or even taking traffic calming measures in areas where there are high rates of wildlife vehicle interaction. And then ideally, the project could be expanded across the state. And much of that depends on the degree of success of this project. But ultimately, we are working to create a safer Loudoun County for wildlife and drivers and ensure everyone gets where they intend to go safely. With that, any questions?
All right. Thank you, Crissy and Alexa. That was really wonderful overview. So real fast before we go into questions, I am going to share the Habitat Connectivity Hub. So again, this is the hub. This is the hub, and so I'm going to briefly show you guys before we hop into questions where you can find this information on this Loudoun County project. So let me share my screen real fast. Okay. Go. All right. Let me make this just a little bit bigger. So you can see the full hub. Okay. So this is Virginia's Habitat Connectivity Hub. If you haven't already gone, I definitely suggest you do and to explore it. So really trying to bring together all different aspects of habitat connectivity and really wonderful projects of the Virginia Safe Wildlife Corridors Collaborative. So I'm going to show you where you can find this Loudoun County research. So once you get to the hub, if you navigate to county initiatives, you can click right on that. And the Loudoun County Research Project is the very first one. With the hub, you can get a nice overview of the project, although we had a really nice one here. And you can look at the data of the high frequency of deer vehicle collisions. You can also click this tab to go straight to Alexa's really wonderful report and get the more full in-depth look at her research. So she goes over all of her methods, which are really wonderful. And then what's really cool with this is you can look at the priority map of where they think crossings would have the most impact, and you can go in depth, as Alexa said, into each crossing. So you can look at this and all the data and the reasoning why these crossings were ranked in this way. So really just a wonderful, awesome report, and I highly recommend checking this out. So along with getting that report on the hub, you can, of course, get an overview of all of the data. So we try to go over really briefly the overview of the data. And then, of course, looking at the Citizen Science Initiative. And we do have their sort of observation hub on our hub. And this is connected to their original data. So it's constantly updated with their updates, and you can interact with it directly on the hub. So for instance, right here on Route 7, hopefully my computer's freaking out a little bit. There's too much going on, but you can click on each dot and you can see sort of the data collection and how that works. So this was a fox. And just really, really wonderful research for us to be able to see all different types of wildlife vehicle conflict. So not just that deer and bear. So this is very much so for reducing that wildlife vehicle conflict, but also biodiversity conservation, of course, because these roads are really having such a large impact on Virginia's biodiversity. So again, you can interact with this directly on the hub, and it just goes over briefly about the project. I will update the emails because Crissy, I think, has the most direct email, and we will send out after this webinar to everyone who registered for the event that email. I'll also update the hub so it's the most relevant email, so you can contact Crissy and get involved if you would like. All right. So now let's move on to questions. And again, if you have a question, please do try to put it in that Q&A section of the webinar, so we can organize that and get it sent to me. So I'm going to start going over those questions. Let's see here. Lots and lots of people saying great work to both of you. So really awesome work. And let's see here. Okay, so about Alexa's research, one presumes that only deer and bear collisions with either somewhat heavy vehicle damage or human harm are reported to the police. So most of these are deer and bear getting reported to the police. Have you considered smaller wildlife? So smaller, and so things like amphibians, salamanders, different types of birds. And gathering data on all these other types of animals that are very sadly impacted as well.
Yeah, so the police reports do only deal with deer and bear. Um, and the other problem is, yes, that the police are only called if the damage to the vehicle is pretty high or someone was injured. So even all of the deer and bear vehicle collisions aren't even counted because the police might not always be called. But yeah, that's where the citizen science comes in to get a look at these smaller animals. It's still really hard for amphibians to be monitored just because they are so small, and even when someone is deliberately looking for them from their car, they're so tiny it can be hard to see, and you're going fast on these highways. So I don't know. There probably is another data gap on amphibians, but we do document birds, and people put in a lot of bird observations. I've looked through the data now and then, and there are a decent amount of birds, so I think we capture that pretty well. But yeah.
Awesome. And just to give sort of like another plug to the Habitat Connectivity Hub, we also are trying to incorporate wildlife rehabilitation data. So wildlife centers across the state of Virginia who receive wildlife are recording if it's potentially from wildlife vehicle conflict. So this can include also our smaller guys. So we are looking at that data as well. So you can check out that information on the hub. And then I think to kind of go along with that question, there's a lot of interest on hawk wildlife vehicle conflict. So just kind of talking about what can we do to reduce hawk fatality in vehicle collisions, because they talk a little bit about Route 7. There's that overpass that has a lot of hawk vehicle conflict. And is there any way to kind of highlight more dangerous intersections for these hawks in potential, and like could that result in like better management of speeding, like speed zones? I have an answer to this as well, but I'll give you guys the first answer.
Yeah, I can jump in. So for hawks, there's two parts to this. First, you want wildlife mitigation or wildlife crossing and vehicle conflict mitigation strategies in place so that hawks aren't needing to go in the road to pick up roadkill, which is why they're ending up there in the first place. So that's step one. But the other part of that is driver education. Where people don't really understand that birds of prey cannot take flight as quickly as other birds. So for example, people think that like it's similar to crows where they take off very quickly and they fly away. As your vehicle approaches, that's not the case for raptors. And so it's something where drivers need to understand that hawk, it physically cannot lift off as quickly as other birds. And so that's an opportunity to reach out to drivers and say, be aware that hawks are in a particular area, or if you see any bird of prey, that it will not be able to physically cannot take flight as quickly as you think it would. So you need to slow down.
Yeah, that's a great answer. Yeah, they've been doing some research on this as well, showing that like these birds of prey actually fly lower across highways, so they're actually like more likely to be nicked by something, like by a higher vehicle going by. So yeah, I think that's a really great point, is to you know, we of course need better crossings. We need better laws put in place to make sure that wildlife crossings are a priority in Virginia. But however, it does also come down to educating the driver to be, you know, we are in their habitat as well, especially in areas where there are these sort of habitat cores. We need to be really aware that there's always a wildlife around us. And VDOT does try to consider when there's areas with higher wildlife concentrations and put that into consideration with their speeds, but it needs to be a little bit more regulated, definitely. But yeah, it starts with education, so that's great. Okay, so let's see. You know, I don't actually know the answer to this question, and I wonder if you guys do, and this is probably something I should know, but where can I find my county's rank in terms of wildlife vehicle collisions? Because we know that Loudoun County is sort of the highest in terms of that deal vehicle. Do you guys know if there's any place to find other county information?
I got that statistic from VDOT. I don't know if it's like publicly accessible. It was on a spreadsheet that was like shared with me for the project, so I'm not sure if it's publicly accessible or not. Yeah, I don't
Okay,
know.
that's a great answer because I think I did know that, and so that is going to be one of my tasks to get that information. So great question, Barb. I think that is something that does need to be more publicly available and more widely distributed. So let me work on trying to get that from VDOT so we can have those rankings. But great question. Thank you, Alexa. Okay, so let's see here. Da, 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 da. Okay, so for road signs and wildlife vehicle conflict, do the changeable road signs work to decrease wildlife collisions? What is the gist of the data on this?
Yeah, so VDOT has done a study on that, and they found it adding those signs at certain times of the year. So they put them out during the fall, usually when the deer are the most active, and only at certain times of the day where there's a lot of traffic because there's issues with people becoming habituated to the signs. That's why they're changeable message signs, because if you put up that yellow sign that says deer crossing, people get used to it being there, they don't pay attention to it. But they've been found to reduce deer vehicle collisions by up to 50%. So they're definitely effective. Yeah, they reduce the collisions.
Yeah, we have some other great research, which I think is also featured on the hub. If you go, our really wonderful Bridget Donaldson from the Virginia Transportation Research Council has done research on these types of wildlife vehicle conflict mitigation, and I can direct you to those resources. I can put them in the follow-up emails for you guys to show the research that she's done on these changeable message signs. But yeah, it's very interesting of like, if you have that just constant yellow sign, folks don't slow down or they just get used to it. And so we kind of need this reiteration of importance. So these changeable message signs. And I think Virginia Tech is doing some research on message signs that will flash when like a deer or a bear are in the like direct vicinity. So they're still doing research on that kind of mitigation. Okay, awesome. And then for wildlife crossing funding, I assume there's a state-funded budget for this project. Which state agency budget is involved? Which state agencies are involved? Do you guys have an answer to this? Because I definitely have an answer for this, but I'll let you guys go first.
Yeah, so it's not state funding, it's federal funding. And so as part of that infrastructure bill, there is money available through grants to states and localities to be able to implement wildlife crossing solutions. And so ideally, this Virginia would be able to submit for a grant to install any kind of wildlife mitigation solutions. And that is something where, you know, I think it also becomes important just to kind of understand how funding works in the state. So for example, like DWR is not funded through like general taxes, it's funded through excise taxes. And so knowing that the money wouldn't come from the state, like the Department of Wildlife Resources, that it would need to come from a federal bill. I think just kind of, at least in my experience on the project, you know, becoming a better information consumer and understanding how funding structures work, it would really be through federal grants that would provide the funding for this. So it wouldn't come from the state budget or state agencies.
Awesome. Thank you so much. Yeah. And just like Crissy mentioned, there's the Wildlife Corridor Action Plan. And so that's a huge way for these state agencies to try to get some of those federal funding, is that now we have this Wildlife Corridor Action Plan. But Wild Virginia is also very involved in trying to get a bill passed in Virginia to have a Wildlife Corridor grant fund put in place that would be a permanent state funded area to put private and state funding into this general fund that state agencies and localities and tribes can apply to for connectivity projects. However, that bill, Senate Bill 455, this past General Assembly session did not go through, unfortunately, but we will be trying again next year. I put in the chat, that is the link to Senate Bill 455 and all the language around that. So please do stay tuned and hook on to Wild Virginia's listserv so you can get involved in advocacy efforts to make this state funding, the state fund, a reality. Okay, so we have one for Alexa. So great job, Alexa. How long did this project take you? What was the toughest part of this project?
It took me a year. So William and Mary has this really amazing program called the Conservation Research Program. And what it does is it calls for external organizations to academia, so like nonprofits, government organizations. It asks them to submit project proposals for students to work on. And Jordan was the one who submitted this kind of project proposal. And I applied and was selected to be on the project, and then I got to work on it for a year. And William and Mary paid me over the summer, so I got to stay in Williamsburg and work on that. And then during the year, it's for like academic credit for 2 semesters. The toughest part, I think choosing the areas was very difficult. There are a lot of places in Loudoun that need mitigation, and it was hard to narrow it down to just 10, and it's hard to select which ones are more important than other ones, because there's some that I would see that would be really high areas of wildlife vehicle collisions, and like we're right by all these great habitat corridors, but there's no existing underpass there. So if the government tried to put in a crossing there, it would cost millions and millions of dollars, because they would have to construct something and potentially tear up the road. So it was hard to decide on like which is most ecologically important and which is most feasible to have something be done. But I tried my best, and that's where the ranking came out. But that was difficult to do.
Yeah, I mean, you did such, I mean, I am just such a big proponent of this research project. So please, if you can, read the full report. It's really quite incredible. And I really think there's going to be a lot of good that comes out of it. I think we're going to see some exclusionary fencing added to already existing underpasses, and we can get better wildlife vehicle mitigation. So that's great. And I think, so here's a little bit more general one about crossings and VDOT. So any knowledge of like how many crossing improvements are already in use, and does VDOT keep track of that? So I think in specific, when you were working with VDOT and working with these structures, did you see any kind of like improvements already happening to culverts or underpasses or anything like that?
Yeah, I know there's some fencing already put up in the state. I think closer to Charlottesville on 64 or in 81, there's some. Don't, I'm pretty sure. Um, Other than that, I do not know. I know there's none in Loudoun yet. But they are making progress towards getting some things done, even if they are smaller things. Like the report the report I wrote does talk a lot about fencing, but it also talks about improvements to the underpasses, like just if it's allowing passage for a river, you can add a dry pathway under there. So there's somewhere for the wildlife to walk, and that might increase usage of that by the wildlife, because they don't want to walk through the water, it looks too deep, whatever. So clearing out underbrush and making these paths can also improve the passability, and I think that's where Loudoun is looking at starting to do something. Yeah.
Awesome. Yes. Again, you can find that information on the Habitat Connectivity Hub. We did highlight some of the projects VDOT is already doing for making these underpasses more used by wildlife for that purpose. So they're adding exclusionary fencing. And yes, there's one on I-64 that they're heavily researching. So they put exclusionary fencing around 2 existing underpasses, and they already saw amazing results. I think something like 90% reduction in deer vehicle collisions with that exclusionary fencing put in place. So it's good. We're seeing good research. Okay, and this one's a little bit more of a technical question, so I don't know if you guys know of this. I haven't heard of some of these, but have you looked at network analysis for stream systems and incident clusters? Are you doing kriging analysis for the clustering? I don't know if you guys have heard of those.
No.
For the hotspots, I used a kernel density estimator. If anyone is familiar with that, hopefully that answers the question. But yeah,
Okay.
kernel density estimator. I did not look at stream connectivity. I just looked at how many miles of stream were within a certain radius of the hotspot. Yeah.
Awesome. If you have, I mean, I think this is a good segue. If you have like things that you think might help this analysis and aid our researchers, please do. You can email me and I can get you in contact with other researchers that are continuing this research. So please do feel free to email me, jessica@wildvirginia.org, if you think you have stuff this could help. So I'm always willing. Please do join our collaborative too, and we can get you in touch with researchers, which is the main priority of the collaborative. Okay, so awesome. We, I think, have one more question. Okay, here we go. Is the pathway only in underpasses? I have seen overpasses that looks like grassy natural paths in Luxembourg. Would this be feasible in Virginia?
The overpasses themselves, so those like grassy things that you see constructed, like I had the picture in my slides, those are very expensive. They cost millions and millions of dollars to construct, and they need a lot of habitat on either side of the road. So in some areas in Virginia, that might be more possible. I don't know if Loudoun is necessarily somewhere where it could be. But yeah, the underpasses make that same kind of path. So having a path underneath the bridge or through the culvert that is dirt, not gravel, not concrete, that has plants growing on it, that has some kind of light so it's not so dark, and they can actually see, the animals can actually see the other side of the fence or the other side of the passage, and it doesn't look like they're going into utter darkness. Those are all things that help improve the passage. Yeah, so it's like making what you see over the top, but just underneath instead.
Yeah, great. Yeah, so we currently don't have any overpasses in Virginia. They are, we're thinking about potentially constructing them for elk in Southwest Virginia. It's a little bit more feasible there, but they have estimated the cost of each one of those overpasses to be about $5 million. So it's a much larger project. So sort of the research that Crissy and Alexa are promoting is the use of these underpasses. So because it's a lot, we can get a lot more bang for our buck, basically. We a little bit cheaper, some are already existing. We just have to add that exclusionary fencing to them. And like we saw on I-64, they really do help with reducing that wildlife vehicle conflict. We just have to constantly keep doing research on what makes those underpasses more enticing for wildlife and yeah, effective. And then I think we have one last question, and I'm not sure if you guys have the answer to this, if you've heard this. maybe in your doing all this wonderful research, but have you heard about any sort of future research into predator-prey interactions along underpasses? So like maybe certain species are deterred from using an underpass if, you know, for certain reasons, and maybe predators is one of them.
Yes, so when I was doing the literature review for this project and kind of like just reading about wildlife crossings to get more informed, there are cases where predators will kind of stalk one end of the underpass and like they start learning that things are funneling through here, and that if they just kind of hide around the edge, they can jump out and get what's ever coming through. Um, so I think that has been found in some like predatory cat species like bobcats. I don't think the things I had read were on the West Coast, or in other countries. So nothing in Virginia. But roads themselves also can sometimes make it easier for predators to prey on these smaller animals or make it harder for them to find food. It's kind of both things, but the passages can sometimes act as prey traps. Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah, great question. There's probably a lot of really good research coming out of that, and that's definitely something that we're going to be monitoring. So a lot of the underpasses that, for instance, that Alexa is selecting and prioritizing, VDOT is looking into lots of camera trapping to sort of monitor wildlife use of these underpasses. So that is definitely something that's always going to be continued. Well, I think we're almost at time. So this was super wonderful. We're getting a lot of congratulations and thank you so much for all the work you're doing in Loudoun County. This is such a huge undertaking, but so hugely important as well. And we're just so grateful to have you guys explain a little bit more in depth your wonderful project. So just for folks to keep in mind, we will send out a email to you after this with the recording, and we'll also send you the email that Crissy gave us. She also put it in the chat, but we'll send it in the email as well. And any other hot information from this that you guys would like, and of course information on the hub, so you can again look at this project more in depth. And well, thank you so much for everybody attending, and yeah, look out for that email. But yeah, everybody have a wonderful evening. Thank you, Alexa and Crissy. This was great. And thank you to Maggie and Kylie for helping organize.
Thank you for having us.
Have a wonderful evening, guys.